Hi, this is Charlie. It's spring 2020. Unfortunately, right now we're experiencing the coronavirus. Many of us are home, many of us aren't working. Hopefully, everyone out there is doing well and is healthy and is doing the best they can, and that we'll get through this. Um, I happen to be restoring my 67 Camaro, so I'm using some of that time here at home. I've run into a few problems, and I figured it'd be nice to share with you folks how I solved them. So let me share with you. It's just a body shell. It's a complete frame-off restoration. In fact, one of the important things I'd like to share is that if you ever have a car that you plan to restore, try, even though you may not have a place to store it inside, at least keep it off the ground. I've had this car since 1976. It was a beat up, smoky daily driver, but I kept it. I parked it in my backyard and it sat there for 10 years rotting away. I wish I had done a little bit more to keep it up off the ground. These old GMs, as everybody knows, weren't good at keeping water out. A lot of the seals had all dried up. Water got in through the windshield, the rear window, quarter panels. So it was a mess. So as you can see, everything in black is a brand new quarter panel that I've welded on. And I want to thank everybody who's put videos out there to share, because I certainly took advantage of them. And this is the first time I've ever done a video. I'll talk more about the body and how far I've gotten. But what I wanted to share with you is that I got a brand new 12-bolt rear axle. I bought it from American Powertrain. I moved up from the old mono-leaf, which there you go, right there on the floor, to a multi-leaf spring. So I naturally ordered a multi-leaf spring perch, but I did keep the original spring mounts. As you can see, one right here. It's all cleaned up, ready to be mounted on. In fact, I have one on the axle right now, but you'll notice there's a gap. It's about a 3/8 gap right about there. And the problem is, if I keep torquing down on the U-bolts, it's gonna distort the bottom plate. It'll be a weak point. So what I did was I made these plates here. They're, believe it or not, I didn't have 3/8 steel, thick steel, so I took a piece of 1/4 inch, and I just hacked out a U-shape opening, and then a piece of 1/8 inch, and that's where I measured precisely the distance between the holes and drilled them out, and then welded them together and ground the welds down. So they came out pretty good, and I know that's going to give me a nice solid, once I bolt those in, there we go, sorry about that, nice solid connection between my bottom mounting plate and the U-bolts. Those U-bolts came from well, the whole suspension kit came from CPP, and they're 1/2 inch diameter. In fact, I had to drill out the holes on the bottom plate, and I also had to work the holes a little bit wider so everything fit better in the rear axle. So little things like that. You'll see I even put grease as I test fitted the U-bolts. I put grease on the axle so I wouldn't scrape the powder coating off. I decided to stick with the standard 1967 arrangement for the shocks, even though it's probably been known to create a wheel hop where the shock mounts are mounted both on the front of the axle, while the 68, 69 stagger them. I just wanted to keep that original. I don't know, maybe it was a mistake, but I did it, and I'm just sticking with it. So one of the things I had to do was, when I ordered the axle, I had to specify that I wanted the shocks both in the front, not non-staggered, because that's where they mounted the brake calipers in that position. In fact, another thing I wanted to share with you was the cables to the parking brake. As you can see, I maintained or kept the brackets for the parking brake cables in place, because even though the parking brake cable's now up at the top, where I probably could route it above, it's a very long cable. And in fact, I believe that when they made this setup, they put the long cable with the intentions of routing it through the bracket, which is right there. And then it's plenty long to meet up with right where the bracket would be on the frame. That's why I have this piece of tape identifying it. In fact, if I didn't route it on the bracket, look how long it is. It'd be pretty messy under the car. Let's see, can you see that? Possibly interfering with the exhaust system. So I kept the brackets, the parking brake cable brackets in place to route them underneath the spring, like you see here, just like the original setup. So something I gave some thought to and decided that would be the best solution to keep it original. Okay, so that was one problem. I mean, that was another problem I had to give some thought to. The spring plate shims, took care of that. And then something else that I came across was the polyurethane spring bushings. Okay, believe it or not, I did not read the instructions. So there were not instructions, but there was a parts list, and the thickness right here for the polyurethane bushings is thinner for the frame bushings than the springs. That way they're both equal distance. And I didn't read that. I didn't take the time to do that. So I just started putting the bushings in however they went. As you can see in the parts list, you can see that a different part number, a thicker bushing, is for the spring bushings, while the frame has a thinner one. I'll show you a picture of that. In fact, we'll take a look at that, and I'll show you the solution. There we go. Let's see. So you can see the bushings are in place. I have the shackles in place. The bushings are thinner under the frame, and there's not a lot of space in there. And I put the wrong ones in, so I had to get them out. And that's where the big problem came. They don't just pop out. They're really tough to get in, so they weren't going to come out any easier. So I went to Harbor Freight and I bought a bearing separator and puller set, and just turn this off a minute. And I used one of them, and it was pretty easy to pull the bushing out of the springs, because the springs were off the car, so it was pretty easy to put that in place. You just take a hammer and whack it off, knock it out. The problem was getting under the car, and this is what I had to do. So I took the smaller one, and I kept the original base, but I had to custom make a top plate. So it was very narrow to get up in the space where the trunk pan floor is, and I welded on some 3/8 bolts. As you can see, I just took them from a set of U-bolts, cut them, welded them in place, and it worked out really good. Basically, it just squeezes and gets behind the bushing, like so, and then you take a pry bar and then you pry the tool away from the frame, and that's how you get it out. And it worked. I didn't destroy any bushings. I didn't ruin anything. I was able to get the proper bushings in. So the important thing is read the directions. Although there weren't any directions, at least read the parts list, and notice that they're different parts. And why are they different parts? Because there's a difference between them. And don't make the same mistake I did. So anyway, I just wanted to share with you that solution. It came out pretty good. Took like 2 days to do what should have taken 2 hours. I learned my lesson. Back to the old Camaro, as you can see. Like I said, everything's new. New floor pans, new tail panels, new wheel wells. I was able to keep the the subframes, the rear frames. How are we doing under here? Everything you can see is really nice and clean now. New brake lines are in place. I don't know, I guess this isn't the easiest focusing, but underneath it's all nice. And we're ready to bolt in that new rear axle, get the suspension in place, and eventually start getting the body painted. Floor plugs. Can you see one? Yeah, everybody knows what they're for, right? They're for when they manufacture the car, they dip it, and they dip them into the vat of primer and cleaners, it's so they drain out, that they're really not intended to expect you to flood your car and have to drain water out of it. I glued mine in using epoxy, same epoxy that I glued the roof skin in. Yes, I know the roof skin's welded in on the sail panels and up at the windshield supports, but it's glued in up here by the drip rail. It's all glued in, body epoxy, body adhesive epoxy along the window and the windshield. That's all glued in up there. So I glued in the floor pan plugs, and you'll notice they're up because I wanted them to be level and even with the rest of the floor pan. And yeah, I did some searching on the internet to see what other people did, but you can see that this surface, let's make sure we got that, this surface is now even with that surface, so I think I did the right thing. At the same time, I do remember one floor pan plug in the trunk still original, and it was in the up position. So there's all the brake pedals have been cleaned up and put in place. Little things like, I had to cut this is a console car. This is a rally sport car. Came with the optional console. So new floor pan meant you had to measure and put the console mount and cut the hole for the shifter back in place. Everything takes some time. I was able to keep the firewall, able to keep the dashboard. The upper dash has been replaced. That was all rotten. There's new wheel wells, new floor pan. There's a shot from inside the trunk. Took some time, but I think the car's going to come out really nice. And like I said, it was mine since 1976. It's the new subframe. Not new, I'm sorry. Repainted and cleaned up, bolted back in place. New front suspension I've been working on putting together. The original firewall. Putting in power steering. The new power steering box is in place. In fact, this was a six-cylinder, 3-speed, and there it is sitting in the corner. So I'm putting a TKO 500 5-speed in, and I'm thinking of putting in a more modern fuel-injected LS motor. Haven't decided from what or where, but eventually I'll explore that. So there's my 67 Camaro. Hopefully you found my video helpful. Not the greatest, my first time ever doing something like this, but I felt it was a chance to do something for folks, and that everybody else has done so much for me. Like I said, if you still have something, you want to save it and restore it, keep it up off the ground. It's not always practical to keep it in a garage. Not everybody has an extra garage to keep it in. But do your best. Stay well. Hopefully everybody gets through this coronavirus and that we're all safe and healthy and get back to work. God bless you.